Chapter 9 The Quarnthians Bedtime Story, titled Loving Like Cats and Dogs, channeled by Daniel Scranton.
Behold, this is our latest transmission. We are the Quarnthians, and we bring you this bedtime story. Once upon a time, there was a pack of stray dogs. Amongst the pack was a dog named Clarence. Clarence usually went along with whatever the pack did, whatever the pack wanted. Clarence would go with the flow and comply, even if at times he felt there was a better choice, something else they could have done, something else they could have ventured towards. He was happy when the rest of the pack was happy. He was sad when anyone in the pack was sad. They lived in peace and harmony in this way. They went around foraging for food, looking for a nice place to sleep, and looking for toys to play with whenever they could find a toy. One day, in another part of the city where they lived, there was a pregnant cat waddling around, looking for a soft, quiet, dark place to give birth to her kittens. And she found that place just in time, as the first little kitten came out. Before she knew it, this mama had given birth to 8 little kittens. And she cared for them. She bathed them. She fed them. They played together until it was time to go out into the world, to go and seek their own way, their own food, their own lives. For it is harder for 9 cats to stay together than you might imagine, especially when they are all stray cats. They all went out on their own adventures, and amongst the litter was a female cat named Wilma. Wilma began to forage, began to find that it was hard to find food. There were a lot of stray cats and stray dogs in this particular neighborhood. She did her best. She always found enough. And she considered it to be an abundant world that she lived in. One that always found a way to provide for her. One day, as she was strolling through an alley. She happened to see Clarence off in the distance. Clarence and his pack were in the middle of a meal, but something told Clarence to turn around, to look over his shoulder. And that's when his eyes locked eyes with Wilma's. Clarence had never seen such a cute and lovely little kitten in all of his days. He felt drawn to her. He wanted to help her, wanted to show her the ropes and give her some of what he and his friends in his pack had found. He sent this message telepathically to the other dogs, and they could not have been more certain that they did not want to add a little kitten to their pack, and they certainly did not want to share the food they had just found outside the back of a bakery. Clarence felt torn. Immediately, he always went with the pack, with what they had to say. He knew that they were his family. But when he looked into the eyes of this little kitten, who for some reason was still standing there, hadn't run away, Clarence could feel the connection that was there. It was a connection that seemed to span lifetimes. So Clarence reluctantly walked away from the pack and got closer and closer to little Wilma. And he communicated telepathically to her, saying, "Hello, my name is Clarence. You look lost." Wilma said, "I am not lost. I am out looking for food, just like you and your friends." Clarence asked, "Are you having any luck?" Wilma replied, "Not today." Clarence offered his assistance. Wilma almost couldn't believe it. Why would this being who looked nothing like her, who certainly wasn't related to her in any way, want to help her to find food, especially when he had to find food for himself? But she didn't question it any more than that. She said yes. Clarence walked away from the pack with his new friend, looking over his shoulder as they continued to bury their faces in the day-old pastries and breads. Clarence said to Wilma, again, by communicating with his energy, "I know there's a fish place around here, and I've seen cats eat fish before. You seem to really like it. Let's go and wait until they throw some out." To her knowledge, Wilma had never had fish, so she was curious about this substance, this foodstuff that so many cats enjoyed. And so they went to the back of the fish place, and they sat, patiently waiting in a way that wouldn't draw attention to themselves. Wilma snuggled up to Clarence. His fur was soft, his body was warm. He didn't look like a stray dog. He didn't feel like a stray dog. Felt like a dog that was well cared for and loved. And that is because Clarence loved himself and took care of himself. Wilma could feel the good energy coming off of him. And she liked this game of waiting patiently that Clarence was teaching her. She took full advantage of his soft, warm body as she snuggled up against it. And Clarence certainly enjoyed the sensation of being loved, being cuddled in this way. He realized in that moment that this was going to be a long-term friendship and not a short-term one. After a while, one of the people who worked at the fish place opened the back door and threw some of the remains of the day into a dumpster. Dumpster was a standard-sized dumpster, and therefore too high for Clarence to get into. We walked over it together after spotting this very serendipitous event. And Clarence said to Wilma, "There's got to be a lot of fish in there. If you can get to it, you'll have a feast." And Wilma looked around for things to climb. It seemed like the best option was to climb up onto Clarence's back, as he was a big dog, and then make the leap from there, hoping that she could scratch and claw her way up the side of the dumpster to the top, and then dive in. And that is exactly what she did. Clarence even raised up his hind legs a little bit to give her an advantage. She made it on the first try, as she was determined and had no beliefs that said she couldn't do it. In her mind, in her consciousness, fish were sitting right on top of all the garbage. And Wilma quickly started to gnaw away, chewing, nibbling, finding all the best pieces. She asked Clarence if he would like some. And he said, no, my belly is still full from all the pastries and all the bread I had eaten earlier today. This wasn't true, of course. Clarence could always eat. But he wanted her to enjoy it, and he knew the only way for him to eat it would be for her to figure out a way to get it over the side of the dumpster. That might attract attention they didn't want to attract. And so he just let her enjoy her meal of fish until she was fully full. And when she was, she called out to Clarence. He stood right at the bottom of that dumpster for her to jump onto. And when she did, although her claws were very sharp, very pointy, he didn't say anything, didn't let out a yelp. He didn't want her to feel bad. He could already feel love for this little friend. And they went about their business, trotting along through the alleys, down the streets of the city, looking for things to do or people who might want to pet them. There was a woman exiting a store. She had just bought some nice shoes, and she saw the two of them, and she thought it was the cutest thing she had ever seen. This big dog and this little cute kitten roaming the street together. She started petting them. Her husband looked down at the situation and said to her, "Do you want to take fleas into our home?" And she said, it would be worth it. But she got up and they walked away. The two friends continued. Clarence telling Wilma he knew where there was a nice park. They could sit under a tree and nap. Wilma liked naps. She went along for the ride. They made it to the park. There were children playing, people sitting on benches, eating ice cream cones, reading a newspaper, listening to podcasts. Lots of activity in the park. They were starting to get more attention. This big dog and this little kitten seemed like, to many, that this was an uncommon thing. They weren't used to seeing cats and dogs getting along, hanging around with each other. It made people think. It made people wonder if perhaps they could get along with people they didn't agree with politically. They also wondered if they could maybe get along with people from other races and religions that they had nothing in common with, at least not to their knowledge. It made people wonder if they could get along with those who lived on the other side of the world and people they were told were their enemies because they lived in that country. Maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't have to look at the world in that way anymore. These are the types of thoughts that came to the people in the park as they saw a little kitten climb up onto a big dog who was curled up under a tree, and used this dog as a pillow. Of course, there were lots and lots of pictures and videos taken in the park that day. Clarence and Wilma were barely available of the humans, barely aware of the humans. They were having so much fun. And it was so relaxing just to be there and be in their own universe. A universe where they could love each other. And it didn't have to be weird. It didn't have to defy all logic. It was a universe where this sort of thing was accepted and acceptable. Before long, it was nighttime. Clarence awoke to an empty belly, feeling the need to once again go out and look for food. And so they did, together. Clarence hit all the usual spots, knowing, of course, that there was a good chance that his former pack would also be in one of those spots. He felt a little bit worried about that next encounter with them. And Wilma could sense this. She could sense his energy shifting. "Clarence," she said. "Yes," Clarence replied. "Is there something wrong?" Clarence hesitated. "I'm a little worried about what my friends will say when they see us together. I'm a little worried about what they might do." Wilma, wise for her age, told Clarence not to worry, that they were going to think and feel and do what came natural to them, just as the two of them were doing what came natural to the two of them. They were companions. They were compatible, and they already felt love for each other. This soothed Clarence, and in that soothing, he was putting out a high vibration, which of course led to a very fortunate experience with someone putting out some food. A little girl who knew there were strays in the neighborhood. She would put out food at night outside the back door of her family's apartment, so all the stray animals could have some food. And she put it out right before the two of them turned around that very corner. And there it was, a lovely feast. At the other end of that same alley were the remaining members of Clarence's pack. They saw the food and smelled the food first, and they were already headed towards it. The three members of Clarence's pack got to the food just before Clarence and Wilma they all started eating. Clarence could hardly believe that his friends were not trying to keep Wilma from getting any, that they were not growling at her. That they were willing to share. And so he asked them telepathically why they would be so accepting of her suddenly. They responded that they were too busy enjoying the food, and that there appeared to be enough for everyone. Clarence felt his heart warm at this. And he felt that he was still part of this pack. After all, that maybe, just maybe, they had the ability to grow and become more loving beings, just as he had done. As it turns out, he wasn't always following the pack and only doing what they wanted to do. Sometimes they were picking up on his energy, as they often thought of him as the leader, the one whose energy always felt the most balanced. And he, of course, had no idea that he was having such a powerful and positive influence on his friends. But now he was feeling it. And he was feeling that soon enough, the 5 of them would be able to roam the streets together. And they could be one giant canine and feline family. Just then, a couple of young men began walking down the alley. They had been drinking, and they were feeling a little bit more rowdy than usual. They saw the scene of 4 dogs, 1 kitten, eating all this food on the ground, and they didn't like it. They were taught that stray dogs and cats were dirty, filthy beings. They started picking up bottles and other garbage and throwing it at the group. Some of the bottles hit the bricks that the building was constructed of, and glass was shattered. Some of that glass cut a few of Clarence's pack. All 5 of them ran off together as fast as they could, getting away from these 2 young men, finding a safe spot, one of the pack's usual spots that they would go to for rest and for sleep. And the 5 of them began to settle down from that very bad experience that they all shared together. The 2 dogs that were injured lay down. They were unable to reach these wounds. They were placed so close to the part of their bodies where the tail meets the back end. They couldn't reach it to lick their wounds. Wilma could see this, and she volunteered. She said, "I would love to have the opportunity to help you both to heal those wounds, keeping them clean, protecting them from the elements. If you will allow me to, I would be happy to be your little kitten doctor friend." The other 3 members of Clarence's pack were all in a state of shock from this. First of all, they didn't even know they could telepathically communicate with a cat. And they certainly didn't know that cats could telepathically communicate with them. But they heard what they heard. They checked with Clarence. Clarence nodded. And so they all curled up to go to sleep, except for Wilma. She was licking those wounds and lying on top of them at times to make sure that they were protected from the elements, from anything that might drift in and contaminate the wounds. And she did this for most of the night. She fell asleep eventually on one of Clarence's friends' backs. And when everyone in the pack woke up and saw this, saw what she had done throughout the night, they made it official. They accepted her as a part of their pack, as one who would be able to not only provide them with some new skills because of her ability to climb, but also they felt that they would be able to protect her, to be of service to her when other dogs would come around, or even other cats that would be feisty and wanting to pick a fight. And that feeling of being guardians was something that was innate to them, as they are, of course, from Sirius and love to be of service. Little Wilma woke up to see them all looking at her with these very loving eyes, and she knew that they had accepted her into their pack, and that she had made 4 very, very good friends in the course of a day. She looked forward to all the adventures they would have together, to the companionship, and most importantly, to the way that she could feel that this was something important. This was something that was going to help everyone. When unlikely beings could come together, could live with each other, help each other, and show each other love, affection, and everything that people want from companions, and that animals want from companions as well. this was something that she was absolutely correct about, as over the years, more and more people would see this pack of dogs with this one cat, and it would change them. They would feel something in their hearts. They would feel themselves opening up to other people and even other animals that they considered to be enemies, or that they considered to be not as good as them in some way. And so, together, 4 dogs and one little kitten that eventually became a normal-sized cat changed the entire world for the better. That is the end of the story. We are the Quarnthians, and this is goodbye for now.